Hey everyone. Tonight we step into a world where love letters could spark family wars, and a stolen glance might seal your fate for life. Medieval dating and marriage, where romance was a luxury most couldn't afford, and your heart's desire mattered far less than your father's ledger book. So grab something warm to drink, settle in somewhere comfortable, and let's journey back to a time when finding love was less about swiping right and more about surviving the intricate dance of dowries, bloodlines, and divine approval. Now, before we dive in, take a moment to like this video if you're curious about how our ancestors navigated the treacherous waters of medieval romance, and drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. There's something magical about exploring these ancient stories together, no matter where we are in the world. Picture this. It's the year 1247, and somewhere in the rolling hills of northern France, a young peasant girl named Margot is about to discover that love in the Middle Ages comes with a price tag she can barely imagine. But her story, and the stories of countless others like her, reveal a world where marriage wasn't just about two hearts beating as one. It was about survival, politics, power, and the complex web of customs that held medieval society together. Tonight, we're going to unravel the fascinating, often brutal, sometimes surprisingly tender reality of how people dated and got married during the Middle Ages. From the humblest serf to the mightiest king, everyone played by rules that would seem utterly foreign to us today. Rules written by the church, enforced by families, and shaped by an economy where a woman's virtue could be worth more than gold, and a man's bloodline could determine the fate of nations. Let me paint you a picture of what we're about to explore together. Imagine a world where your future spouse might be chosen for you before you could even walk, where a 6-year-old princess could find herself betrothed to a man old enough to be her grandfather, all in the name of peace between warring kingdoms, where peasants paid fines just for the privilege of falling in love, and where the church maintained strict schedules dictating when married couples were allowed to be intimate. This wasn't a world of fairy tale romance, though it certainly had its moments of genuine tenderness and passion. This was a world where love was a dangerous luxury, marriage was a business transaction, and your wedding night might be witnessed by half the village. It was a world where courtly love flourished in the shadows while practical marriages built empires, where Eleanor of Aquitaine could wield poetry like a weapon, and where a merchant's daughter in Venice might find herself traded like a commodity to secure her family's fortune. But here's what makes this story truly captivating. Despite all the constraints, the political maneuvering, and the rigid social hierarchies, real human emotion still found a way to bloom. Love letters were written in secret. Couples defied their families. Hearts were broken and mended across castle walls and village squares. The human spirit, it seems, has always been remarkably persistent when it comes to matters of the heart. So let's begin our journey in that French village where Margot's story unfolds, because understanding medieval marriage means understanding how it worked for everyone, from the bottom of society all the way to the throne rooms of Europe. Margot wakes before dawn, as she always does, to the sound of roosters crowing and her mother stirring the embers in their small hearth. At 17, she's already considered past prime marrying age for a peasant girl, though she doesn't know her family has been quietly negotiating with Henri, the blacksmith's son from the neighbouring village. The negotiations aren't about love or compatibility. They're about the 3 silver coins her father has managed to save, the small plot of land her mother brought to her own marriage, and whether Henri's family can afford the merchet, the marriage fine they'll owe to their lord. You see, in Margot's world, even the act of falling in love requires permission from the lord of the manor. The merchet isn't just a fee, it's a recognition that marriage affects the entire feudal system. When Margot marries, she might move to another village, taking her labour and her potential children with her. Her lord needs to be compensated for that loss. It's a system that treats human affection like a commodity, taxed and regulated like grain or livestock. But the merchet is just the beginning of the financial obstacles facing peasant couples. If Margot had been caught with a man before marriage, her family would face the ledger white, literally a laying down fine that could bankrupt a peasant household. If she had borne a child out of wedlock, the child white fine would follow. These weren't just moral judgments. They were economic weapons that kept the lower classes in line and reinforced the power structure that defined medieval life. Yet despite these crushing restrictions, something beautiful persists in Margot's world. Peasant marriages, when they did happen, were often the only unions in medieval society based on genuine affection. With no great estates to unite or political alliances to forge, peasants could afford the luxury of marrying for love. It was a bitter irony that those with the least freedom in every other aspect of their lives were the most free when it came to matters of the heart. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in a castle overlooking the Thames, a very different kind of romance is unfolding. Lady Eleanor, barely 14 and already considered a valuable political asset, sits in her solar embroidering while her parents negotiate her future with representatives from 3 different noble houses. She has never met any of her potential husbands. She may never meet them until her wedding day, but their bloodlines have been scrutinized, their lands surveyed, and their military potential assessed with the precision of a military campaign. This is the world of aristocratic marriage, where love is not just irrelevant, but potentially dangerous. Lady Eleanor's marriage will determine military alliances, trade agreements, and the balance of power across entire regions. Her dowry, carefully calculated to include lands her grandmother brought to her own marriage decades earlier, will be matched against the dower rights she'll receive from her husband's estates. It's a complex financial instrument disguised as a wedding, and Eleanor herself is perhaps the least important variable in the equation. But even in this calculated world, the human heart finds ways to assert itself. The tradition of courtly love, that elaborate dance of desire and denial, allows nobles to explore romantic feelings within carefully prescribed boundaries. Eleanor may never be able to choose her husband, but she can inspire poetry from the knights in her father's court. She can receive coded messages woven into tapestries or hidden in the petals of flowers. She can experience the intoxicating power of being desired, even if she can never act on that desire. Courtly love operates on a fascinating paradox. It celebrates passion while denying fulfillment, worships women while keeping them powerless, and creates some of the most beautiful poetry in human history while ensuring that the poets and their subjects can never actually be together. It's a safety valve for a society that has locked love away behind walls of political necessity, a way for the human spirit to soar even when the body is bound by duty and expectation. The rules of courtly love are as rigid as any marriage contract. The lover must serve his beloved with absolute devotion, never expecting reward or consummation. The beloved, usually an older married woman, must remain forever unattainable, inspiring noble deeds through her very inaccessibility. Secrecy is paramount, not just to protect reputations, but to preserve the delicious tension that makes the game worthwhile. And above all, the lover must be willing to suffer, to pine, to waste away with longing, because unrequited desire is seen as the purest and most ennobling form of love. This elaborate ritual reaches its zenith in the court of Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful and fascinating women of the medieval world. Eleanor inherits vast territories in southwestern France, making her one of Europe's wealthiest individuals. But more than that, she becomes a patron of troubadours, those poet-musicians who turn courtly love from a literary concept into a living, breathing cultural force. In Eleanor's court at Poitiers, troubadours gather to compose and perform works that celebrate the ideals of chivalry, devotion, and romantic longing. They sing of knights who ride across kingdoms for a single smile from their beloved, of ladies whose beauty inspires men to impossible deeds, of love that burns eternal precisely because it can never be fulfilled. It's a world where emotion becomes art, where the pain of separation is transformed into something transcendent and beautiful. Eleanor's influence spreads across Europe through her marriages, first to Louis VII of France and later to Henry II of England. She carries the culture of courtly love with her, establishing it in royal courts from Paris to London. Under her patronage, what began as a regional tradition becomes a continental phenomenon, influencing literature, art, and social behaviour for centuries to come. But let's not romanticize this world too much. For every Eleanor of Aquitaine wielding cultural influence through her wealth and position, there are thousands of women like our fictional Lady Eleanor, trapped in systems that value them only for their reproductive capacity and their ability to cement political alliances. The poetry of courtly love may soar, but the reality of medieval marriage for most noble women is one of limited choice and endless duty. Consider the marriage of Isabella of France to Richard II of England. Isabella is betrothed at the age of 6 to a man 23 years her senior. The betrothal is legally binding, meaning both parties are committed to the union, but the actual marriage ceremony must wait until Isabella reaches a more appropriate age. This arrangement perfectly illustrates how medieval families balanced political necessity with practical considerations about age and maturity. The 23-year age gap between Isabella and Richard demonstrates how medieval marriages prioritized strategic advantage over personal compatibility. Such arrangements were common among European royalty, where marriage served as the primary tool for international diplomacy and territorial expansion. Isabella's betrothal at such a young age secured peace between England and France, showing how even children became pawns in the great game of medieval politics. These early betrothals reveal one of the most troubling aspects of medieval marriage customs: the treatment of children as political and economic assets rather than individuals with their own rights and desires. While the legal minimum age for marriage was 12 for girls and 14 for boys, corresponding to the medieval understanding of when puberty began, the reality was that noble children were often promised in marriage years before they reached even these young ages. The Church played an increasingly complex role in regulating these arrangements. On one hand, it insisted on the principle of free consent between spouses as the sole requirement for a valid marriage. Neither a public ceremony nor the presence of a priest, relatives, or witnesses was necessary to create permanent matrimonial obligations. This doctrine, radical for its time, theoretically gave even young people the right to refuse marriages arranged by their families. On the other hand, the Church's practical influence often reinforced existing power structures. Priests blessed arranged marriages, collected fees for performing ceremonies, and rarely challenged the authority of parents to arrange their children's futures. The tension between theoretical principle and practical politics created a system where free consent existed in law but was often meaningless in practice. The Church's growing control over marriage brought both benefits and restrictions. It provided legal protection for women by insisting that marriage was a sacrament, requiring the consent of both parties. It established clearer rules for valid unions and created a system of canon law that could, in theory, protect individuals from forced marriages. But it also imposed strict limitations on divorce and sexual behaviour, creating new forms of control, even as it dismantled old ones. The development of marriage as a sacrament was gradual and faced resistance from various quarters. The first official declaration that marriage was a sacrament came at the 1184 Synod of Verona, partly as a reaction against Cathar teachings that marriage and procreation were evil. But it took many centuries for Christian conceptions of marriage to fully develop, reflecting regional variations and broader historical changes. This evolution of Church doctrine created fascinating contradictions in medieval marriage practices. Secret marriages, performed without parental consent or public ceremony, were technically valid under Church law, but socially and economically disastrous for the families involved. Young people who married in secret could find themselves disinherited, exiled, or worse, even though their unions were blessed in the eyes of God. The publishing of bans represented the Church's attempt to balance its theological principles with social realities. After a marriage was arranged, a wedding notice was posted on the church door for 3 separate occasions, at least a day apart. This gave communities time to raise objections to proposed marriages and helped prevent invalid unions. Anyone who knew of impediments to the marriage, such as existing marriages, close blood relationships, or other canonical problems, was expected to come forward. The system of bans served multiple purposes beyond preventing invalid marriages. It gave families time to raise financial or social objections, allowed communities to voice concerns about unsuitable matches, and provided a final opportunity for young people to escape unwanted arrangements. In a world where information travelled slowly and record-keeping was haphazard, the bans were often the only way to ensure that all relevant information about a proposed marriage came to light. But the most fascinating aspect of the ban system was how it turned marriage into a community affair. Medieval people didn't see marriage as a private matter between 2 individuals, but as a public institution that affected everyone in the community. The posting of bans invited public scrutiny and community involvement in ways that would seem intrusive to modern couples, but were essential to medieval social organisation. The restrictions on who could marry were incredibly complex and reflected the Church's growing sophistication in canon law. Before 1215, anyone with a great-great-great-great-great-grandparent in common was forbidden to marry, a restriction so broad that it was nearly impossible to enforce in small communities where everyone was distantly related. The Fourth Lateran Council of 1215 relaxed these rules, reducing the prohibited degree of relationship to anyone sharing a great-great-grandparent, roughly equivalent to modern restrictions. These consanguinity rules weren't just about preventing genetic problems, though medieval people were certainly aware that close relatives produced unhealthy children. They were also about controlling marriage as a tool of social and economic policy. By making it difficult for noble families to intermarry repeatedly, the Church ensured that wealth and power couldn't be concentrated in ever smaller circles of relatives. The enforcement of these rules created opportunities for political maneuvering that would seem cynical to modern observers. Marriages could be arranged and consummated, only to be annulled years later when political circumstances changed and a convenient blood relationship was discovered. Kings and nobles maintained genealogists whose job was to trace family trees in ways that would support their political objectives, whether that meant validating a current marriage or finding grounds for annulment. This brings us to one of the most important aspects of medieval marriage, the question of annulment and divorce. For Christians in Western Europe, getting married was relatively simple, requiring nothing more than a consenting exchange of vows between 2 people. Getting unmarried, however, was far more complicated, since church teaching increasingly stressed the indissolubility of marriage. Medieval law recognized 2 forms of marriage dissolution, both very different from modern divorce. The first was annulment or divorce of vinculo matrimoniae, a ruling that a marriage had never been valid in the first place. This could be based on coercion, underage consent, too close blood relationship, or failure to consummate the marriage. The second was separation, or divorce mensa et thoro, which allowed couples to live apart but prevented remarriage while both spouses lived. The distinction between these 2 forms was crucial for understanding how medieval people thought about marriage. Annulment didn't end a valid marriage. It declared that no valid marriage had ever existed. This had enormous implications for inheritance, legitimacy of children, and social status. Separation, on the other hand, acknowledged that a valid marriage existed, but had become impossible to maintain due to cruelty, adultery, or other serious problems. As our journey through medieval dating and marriage continues, we'll explore how these legal and religious frameworks played out in the daily lives of real people, from the humblest peasant to the mightiest king. We'll witness wedding ceremonies that would seem alien to modern eyes, discover the intimate details of how medieval couples navigated their relationships, and uncover the surprising ways that love, passion, and human connection flourished even within the most restrictive social systems. The story of medieval marriage is ultimately a story about the eternal tension between individual desire and social necessity, between the human heart and the demands of survival in a harsh and unforgiving world. It's a story that reminds us that while the forms of love and marriage may change across centuries, the fundamental human need for connection, intimacy, and partnership remains constant across all times and places. But perhaps the most revealing window into medieval marriage comes not from the grand political unions or the elaborate poetry of courtly love, but from the countless ordinary ceremonies that bound together merchants, craftsmen, and farmers across the medieval world. These weddings, while lacking the pageantry of royal affairs, followed their own intricate rituals that tell us everything we need to know about how medieval people understood love, commitment, and community. The wedding ceremony itself was a masterpiece of symbolic theatre. Every gesture loaded with meaning that would have been instantly recognizable to any medieval observer. Unlike our modern church weddings, medieval ceremonies began not inside the sacred space, but at the church door itself. This liminal location, neither fully secular nor fully religious, perfectly captured the hybrid nature of medieval marriage as both legal contract and spiritual union. Picture the scene on a crisp autumn morning in 1289 outside the stone church of St. Margaret in a prosperous wool town in the English Midlands. Thomas, a young cloth merchant, stands nervously on the right side of the heavy oak doors, while his bride-to-be, Alice, the daughter of a successful dyer, takes her position on the left. The positioning isn't arbitrary. Medieval people believed that Eve was created from Adam's left rib, making the left side the natural place for women. But there's a practical consideration too. Thomas keeps his right arm free, his sword arm, ready to defend his bride should anyone attempt to steal her away during the ceremony. The priest begins with the question that has echoed through centuries of wedding ceremonies. Does anyone present know of any reason why this couple should not be married? The query isn't mere formality. In a world without comprehensive record-keeping, where people might travel hundreds of miles from their birthplace, the community serves as the final safeguard against bigamy, incest, or other impediments to marriage. The silence that follows is pregnant with possibility. Someone could step forward. Someone could destroy everything with a few well-chosen words. But the silence holds, and the priest turns to Thomas and Alice themselves, giving them one final opportunity to confess any reasons that might prohibit their union. This moment captures something profound about medieval marriage. Even in an arranged union, even when families have negotiated for months over dowries and property rights, the church insists on individual consent. Thomas and Alice must speak their agreement aloud, before God and the community. No one can force these words from their lips. The exchange of vows that follows is both achingly familiar and startlingly different from modern ceremonies. Thomas takes Alice's right hand in his and speaks the words that will bind them together until death. I take thee, Alice, to my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part according to God's holy ordinance, and thereto I plight thee my troth. Alice responds with her own vow, but her words carry different promises, reflecting the hierarchical nature of medieval marriage. She pledges not just to love and cherish, but to obey, acknowledging the legal reality that marriage will transform her from a daughter under her father's authority to a wife under her husband's control. Yet there's something deeper in her voice, a recognition that she's choosing this man, this life, this future, even within the constraints of her society. The ring ceremony that follows reveals layers of symbolism that modern couples rarely consider. Thomas places a simple gold band on Alice's thumb, then her index finger, then her middle finger, speaking the words, "In the name of the Father and of the Son." and of the Holy Ghost, as he moves the ring toward its final resting place on her fourth finger. Medieval people believed that a vein ran directly from this finger to the heart, making it the perfect symbol of love's connection to life itself. But the ring represents more than romantic sentiment. It's a public declaration of Alice's new status, a visible sign that she belongs to Thomas and enjoys his protection. In a world where unmarried women exist in legal limbo, the ring transforms Alice from a dependent daughter into a respectable wife with clearly defined rights and responsibilities. Its security and constraint wrapped together in a circle of precious metal. The ceremony concludes with the priest's blessing and the formal kiss that seals the union. But this isn't the end of the wedding day, merely the beginning of celebrations that will last well into the night and reveal just how deeply the community involves itself in the most intimate aspects of married life. The wedding feast that follows serves multiple purposes beyond mere celebration. It's a public demonstration of the family's wealth and status, with the abundance of food and drink reflecting their ability to provide for the new couple. But it's also a ritual of incorporation, bringing Alice into Thomas's family and social circle through the ancient bonds of shared meals and mutual obligation. The food served at medieval wedding feasts followed their own symbolic logic. Eggs represented fertility and new life. Almonds, expensive and imported, demonstrated prosperity and the hope for sweet days ahead. Bread, the staff of life, symbolized the sustenance the couple would provide for each other and their future children. Wine, transformed from simple grape juice through mysterious fermentation, represented the spiritual transformation of marriage itself. But perhaps no medieval wedding tradition seems more alien to modern sensibilities than the bedding ceremony that ritualized preparation for the consummation that would legally complete the marriage. As the evening shadows lengthen and the wedding feast winds down, the focus shifts to the chamber that has been prepared for Thomas and Alice's first night together as husband and wife. The room itself has been blessed by the priest earlier in the day, with holy water sprinkled on the bed and prayers offered for the couple's fertility and happiness. The bed, dressed in the finest linens the families can afford, stands ready for the ceremony that will transform a legal contract into a physical reality. The bridesmaids, giggling and whispering among themselves, help Alice out of her wedding dress and into a shift of fine white linen. Meanwhile, the groomsmen perform the same service for Thomas, their jokes and laughter masking the nervous energy that fills the room. This isn't just about preparing for bed, it's about the ritualized transition from public ceremony to private intimacy. What happens next would shock modern couples accustomed to privacy on their wedding night. The wedding party gathers around the bed, armed with stockings that they proceed to throw at the newlyweds with enthusiastic aim. It's a game with serious undertones. If a groomsman hits Alice with his stocking or a bridesmaid strikes Thomas, tradition holds that the successful thrower will be the next to marry. It's an ancient form of matchmaking, using the couple's fertility to predict and perhaps encourage romantic success among their friends. The ceremony reaches its climax with the sharing of the posset, a warm drink made of ale, wine, eggs and spices that's believed to strengthen the couple for the night ahead. Thomas and Alice drink from the same cup, their hands intertwined, while the wedding party sings traditional songs that range from the sacred to the decidedly ribald. The shared drink represents their union in all things, their willingness to face whatever life brings them together. Finally, mercifully, the curtains are drawn around the bed and the wedding party withdraws, leaving Thomas and Alice alone at last. But even in this most private moment, the community's presence lingers. Everyone knows what's expected to happen behind those curtains. The marriage isn't truly complete until it's consummated, and while the actual act remains private, its occurrence becomes a matter of public record and communal concern. The importance of consummation goes far beyond romantic sentiment. In the eyes of medieval law, An unconsummated marriage isn't really a marriage at all. It can be annulled, dissolved, forgotten as if it never happened. But once Thomas and Alice come together as husband and wife, their union becomes indissoluble, bound not just by human law, but by divine ordinance. They're no longer two separate people, but one flesh, united in the most profound way medieval Christianity understood. For royal and noble couples, the stakes of this moment reach far beyond personal happiness. The bedding ceremony for aristocratic marriages sometimes included actual witnesses who could testify to the completion of the union. In cases where political alliances hung in the balance or succession rights needed protection, the consummation of marriage became a matter of state importance that couldn't be left to the couple's word alone. Consider the marriage of Margaret Tudor to James V of Scotland in 1503, a union designed to bring peace between England and Scotland. The bedding ceremony was witnessed by representatives of both courts, who could later swear that the marriage had been properly consummated and couldn't be dissolved on technical grounds. Margaret's fertility, her ability to produce heirs who might one day unite the English and Scottish crowns, became a diplomatic asset monitored by foreign ambassadors and recorded in state papers. But even for merchant families like Thomas and Alice, the consummation of marriage carries weight beyond the personal. Their future children will inherit Thomas's business, carry on his trade, support them in their old age. The community has invested in their union through gifts, celebration, and witness. Their fertility becomes, in a very real sense, everyone's concern. The morning after the wedding brings its own rituals and revelations. Alice emerges from the bridal chamber transformed, no longer a maiden but a wife, her new status written in her bearing and acknowledged by everyone who sees her. The bloodied sheets, if present, might be displayed as proof of her former virginity and the marriage's consummation, though this practice varies widely across regions and social classes. Thomas, too, has changed overnight. He's no longer a bachelor responsible only for himself, but a husband with obligations to provide, protect, and lead. The ring on Alice's finger marks her as his responsibility, while the community watches to see how well he fulfills his new role. Their relationship will be scrutinized, their arguments noticed, their happiness or discord a matter of public comment and concern. The first weeks of marriage bring a period of adjustment that medieval people understood to be crucial for the union's success. Alice must learn the rhythms of Thomas's household, the preferences of his customers, the expectations of his family. She brings her own dowry goods, her personal possessions, her knowledge of die-making learned from her father, but she must integrate these assets into an existing structure that predates her arrival. Thomas faces his own challenges as he learns to share his space, his resources, his decisions with another person. Medieval marriage manuals, written primarily by clergy who had never experienced married life themselves, offer detailed advice on how husbands should treat their wives. Be firm but gentle, they counsel. Provide correction when necessary, but remember that excessive harshness drives away love. Show affection, but don't become so besotted that you lose your authority as head of the household. The sexual relationship between Thomas and Alice develops within a framework of church teaching that would seem impossibly restrictive to modern couples. The medieval church maintained detailed calendars of when married couples could and couldn't be intimate, creating a schedule that limited sexual activity to fewer than half the days of the year. Sundays were forbidden, as were Thursdays and Fridays, the days associated with Christ's crucifixion and resurrection. All feast days and fast days required abstinence, as did the weeks of Advent and Lent. Alice's monthly cycles imposed additional restrictions, as did pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding. The Church taught that sexual pleasure, even within marriage, should never become the primary purpose of intimacy. Procreation was the goal, and any activity that didn't serve that end was potentially sinful. Yet despite these restrictions, medieval marriage manuals and confessional guides reveal that married couples found ways to maintain intimate, loving relationships. Some theologians even argued that sexual pleasure within marriage was a gift from God, designed to strengthen the bond between husband and wife and make the difficult work of raising children more appealing. The key was maintaining proper priorities, ensuring that spiritual concerns always took precedence over physical desires. The reality of medieval married life often diverged significantly from these theoretical ideals. Thomas and Alice, like countless other couples, had to balance church teaching with human nature, community expectations with personal desires, economic necessity with emotional fulfillment. Their marriage would be tested by childbirth and infant mortality, by economic hardship and social pressure, by the countless small compromises that make any long-term relationship possible. The arrival of children transforms their union in ways both joyful and terrifying. Alice's first pregnancy is celebrated by the community as proof of God's blessing on the marriage, but it also brings dangers that could end her life or leave Thomas a widower before his 30th birthday. Medieval childbirth was a communal affair, with experienced women gathering to assist the labouring mother, while men waited anxiously in another room, powerless to help and terrified of losing their wives. The children who survive infancy become the focus of intense parental attention and community investment. They represent not just the continuation of family lines, but the future of the community itself. Their education, their moral development, their eventual marriages will be matters of concern far beyond their parents' household. In a world without reliable pensions or social safety nets, children are their parents' security against old age and poverty. But child rearing in medieval marriages operates according to principles that would seem harsh to modern parents. Physical discipline is not just accepted but required, with church authorities and secular writers alike insisting that sparing the rod spoils the child. Children are expected to contribute to household labour from an early age, with even noble children learning the skills they'll need to manage estates or run households. The gendered nature of this education reflects the broader assumptions about marriage and family life that structure medieval society. Boys learn their father's trades or prepare for military service, while girls master the domestic skills they'll need as wives and mothers. The assumption that marriage is every woman's destiny shapes girls' education from their earliest years, with even the most privileged daughters learning to spin, weave, manage servants, and oversee food production. Yet within these constraints, medieval marriages could and did develop into relationships of genuine partnership and mutual affection. Thomas and Alice, if they're fortunate, will grow old together, their relationship deepening through shared trials and triumphs. They'll see their children married and their grandchildren born. They'll accumulate the wisdom that comes from decades of compromise, cooperation, and mutual support. The letters and personal documents that survive from medieval marriages reveal couples who found ways to express love, desire, and companionship within the formal structures of their society. Husbands write tenderly to wives during business travels. Wives offer advice and support during difficult times. Couples develop private jokes, shared interests, and intimate knowledge of each other's hopes and fears. These relationships remind us that medieval marriage, for all its constraints and complications, was ultimately about the same fundamental human needs that drive modern relationships. The desire for companionship, for security, for someone who understands your struggles and shares your joys. The hope that together you can build something larger and more meaningful than either of you could achieve alone. The legal and economic frameworks that governed medieval marriage may seem alien to modern couples, but the emotional realities were recognizably human. Thomas and Alice's marriage, like millions of others across medieval Europe, would be shaped by forces beyond their control, but ultimately defined by the choices they made within those constraints. Their success would depend not on perfect circumstances, but on their willingness to build a life together despite imperfect ones. As we follow their story and the stories of countless other medieval couples, we begin to understand that the history of marriage is not just about changing laws and customs, but about the enduring human capacity to find love, create families, and build communities even in the most challenging circumstances. The forms may change, but the fundamental human needs remain constant across centuries and cultures. The merchant's daughter in Venice faces different challenges than the peasant girl in France or the noble lady in England, but they all must navigate the complex intersection of personal desire and social expectation that defines marriage in any era. Their stories remind us that love has always found a way to flourish, even within the most restrictive systems, and that the human heart has proven remarkably adaptable to whatever circumstances history has provided. In the narrow streets of medieval Venice, where the salt air carries the sounds of commerce from dawn to dusk, 16-year-old Caterina Morosini stands at her window, watching the gondoliers navigate the crowded canal below. As the daughter of a prosperous spice merchant, she occupies a unique position in medieval society, neither noble nor peasant, but part of the rising merchant class that's beginning to reshape the economic and social landscape of Europe. Caterina's marriage prospects are being discussed in the counting house below, where her father negotiates not just with potential suitors, but with their family's business interests. Unlike the purely political marriages of nobility or the simple affection-based unions of peasants, merchant marriages must balance love, money, and commercial advantage in ways that require extraordinary diplomatic skill. Her dowry has been carefully calculated to include not just gold and property, but access to her father's trading networks, connections with suppliers in Constantinople, and knowledge of the luxury goods that make Venice wealthy. The families courting her daughter aren't just seeking a wife. They're pursuing a business partnership that could last for generations and determine their descendants' fortunes. The suitor currently under consideration is Marco Dandolo, son of a family whose ships carry goods from Alexandria to London. His proposal arrives not as a romantic gesture, but as a formal business document, outlining the financial terms of marriage with the precision of a commercial contract. The dowry, the dower rights, the inheritance arrangements for future children, all are specified with careful attention to protecting both families' interests. Yet Caterina has advantages that neither Lady Eleanor nor peasant Margot could dream of. The merchant class, dependent on individual initiative and personal relationships for success, cannot afford to ignore their daughter's preferences entirely. A wife who resents her marriage might sabotage business relationships, alienate customers, or fail to manage the complex household economy that supports commercial success. Caterina's opinions matter, not from sentiment but from practical necessity. The courtship that develops between Caterina and Marco unfolds in the public spaces of Venice, under the watchful eyes of both families, but with a freedom that would scandalize the nobility. They meet at the market when she accompanies her mother on shopping expeditions. They exchange glances during Mass at San Marco. They participate in the same religious processions and civic celebrations that mark the rhythm of Venetian life. Their conversations, when they occur, blend personal interest with commercial concerns in ways that would seem calculated to modern couples, but feel natural to young people raised in merchant families. Marco describes his recent voyage to Cyprus, but he's also demonstrating his knowledge of trade routes and his ability to handle dangerous business situations. Caterina discusses her skill at managing servants, but she's also showing her capacity to oversee the complex household that supports a merchant's operations. The gifts they exchange follow the symbolic logic of courtly love but carry additional layers of commercial meaning. When Marco presents Caterina with a small silk purse embroidered with gold thread, he's not just offering a token of affection but displaying his access to luxury goods and his willingness to invest in their relationship. When she responds with a handkerchief worked with her own needle, she's demonstrating both her skill at fine needlework and her understanding of the reciprocal nature of merchant relationships. Their engagement, when it finally occurs, takes place not in a castle or a peasant cottage, but in the loggia of the Morosini Palace. with representatives of both families' business interests present as witnesses. The ceremony blends religious blessing with commercial negotiation, creating a hybrid ritual that captures the merchant class's unique position between sacred and secular concerns. The marriage contract they sign is a masterpiece of medieval legal drafting, specifying not just the obvious financial arrangements, but the subtle details of business cooperation that will define their future relationship. Katerina will maintain her own account books, manage certain aspects of the family's retail operations, and retain legal ownership of property that predates the marriage. Marco will provide specified amounts for household expenses, guarantee Katerina's support in the event of his death, and grant her authority to act on his behalf in certain business situations. These arrangements reflect the merchant class's recognition that successful commercial operations require partnership between husband and wife in ways that neither noble nor peasant marriages typically demand. A merchant's wife isn't just a decorative companion or a source of labor. She's a business partner whose skills and judgment directly affect the family's economic success. The wedding ceremony itself takes place at the church of San Giacomo di Rialto, the traditional center of Venetian commercial life, with the bride and groom standing where countless business deals have been negotiated over the centuries. The symbolism isn't accidental. This marriage, like all merchant marriages, represents a fusion of personal and commercial interests that will be tested in the marketplace as well as the bedroom. The celebration that follows reveals the merchant class's distinctive approach to displaying wealth and status. Unlike noble feasts that emphasize ancient lineage and feudal obligation, or peasant celebrations that focus on community integration, merchant wedding celebrations showcase the exotic goods and cosmopolitan connections that define their social position. The tables groan under foods imported from across the Mediterranean. Spices from India perfume the air. Wines from Cyprus and Crete flow freely. Musicians play instruments crafted in Germany and decorated with ivory from Africa. Every element of the feast demonstrates the global reach of Venetian commerce and the family's ability to command luxury goods from the far corners of the known world. But the most distinctive element of merchant wedding celebrations is their explicitly commercial character. Business associates attend alongside family members, creating opportunities for networking that will serve the new couple throughout their married life. Marriage announcements are sent not just to relatives but to trading partners across Europe and the Mediterranean, informing the commercial world of new alliances and opportunities. The bedding ceremony for merchant couples reflects their class's practical approach to most aspects of life. While the basic ritual remains the same, the emphasis shifts toward fertility and prosperity rather than honor and lineage. The blessings offered focus on the couple's ability to produce heirs who will continue the family business, while the symbolic gifts exchanged often include commercial tokens like keys, coins, and small samples of valuable merchandise. Katerina's transformation from maiden to wife occurs within a framework of expectations that differ significantly from those facing women of other social classes. She's expected to maintain her family's social status through careful management of household affairs, but she's also expected to contribute actively to business operations in ways that would be inappropriate for noble women or impossible for peasant women. Her education, completed before marriage, includes not just the domestic skills considered essential for all women, but also practical commercial knowledge that will serve her throughout married life. She can read and write in multiple languages, calculate exchange rates, evaluate the quality of luxury goods, and negotiate with suppliers and customers. These skills make her a valuable business partner, as well as a wife and mother. The early years of Katerina and Marco's marriage unfold against the backdrop of Venice's commercial calendar, with their personal relationship developing alongside their business partnership. They travel together on trading voyages, with Katerina managing the domestic arrangements that make extended journeys possible, while also serving as an additional pair of eyes and ears in foreign markets. Their children, when they arrive, are raised within the merchant class's distinctive culture of controlled risk-taking and calculated ambition. Sons learn not just their father's specific trade, but the broader principles of commercial success, while daughters receive educations that prepare them to be valuable partners in their own future marriages. The assumption that children will surpass their parents' achievements drives educational choices that emphasize practical skills and global awareness. The marriage develops its own rhythm of separation and reunion as business demands take Marco away from Venice for months at a time. Caterina's letters to her traveling husband reveal a relationship that combines genuine affection with detailed business discussions, creating a form of intimacy that's uniquely suited to their commercial lifestyle. These separations, while emotionally difficult, also provide Caterina with opportunities to exercise authority and develop skills that women in other social classes rarely experience. She manages significant financial resources, makes important business decisions, and represents the family's interests in Marco's absence. Her success in these roles strengthens both their marriage and their commercial position. The challenges facing merchant marriages differ significantly from those confronting other social classes. The constant pressure of business competition, the risks associated with long-distance trade, and the need to maintain relationships across cultural and religious boundaries create stresses that test even the strongest partnerships. Success requires not just personal compatibility, but shared commitment to commercial goals and mutual trust in business matters. Yet merchant marriages also offer opportunities for genuine partnership and mutual respect that are rare in other social contexts. The merchant class's emphasis on individual achievement and practical results creates space for women to develop their talents and contribute meaningfully to family success. The most successful merchant couples achieve a level of cooperation and mutual support that combines the best elements of romantic love and business partnership. Caterina and Marco's marriage, if it prospers, will become a model for their children and an inspiration for other merchant families seeking to balance personal happiness with commercial success. Their relationship demonstrates that medieval marriage could adapt to new social and economic conditions while maintaining its essential functions of providing companionship, producing children, and building communities. But their story also reveals the limitations and contradictions inherent in medieval marriage, even in its most progressive forms. Caterina's business activities, while extensive by medieval standards, still operate within legal and social frameworks that ultimately subordinate her interests to her husband's authority. Her children, while better educated than most medieval youth, will still face marriage arrangements that prioritize family interests over individual preferences. The merchant class's innovations in marriage practices, like their innovations in business methods, represent evolutionary rather than revolutionary change. They work within existing systems to create new possibilities, but they don't fundamentally challenge the assumptions about gender, authority, and family structure that define medieval society. As we move from the bustling canals of Venice to the sun-baked courtyards of Córdoba, we encounter yet another variation on the theme of medieval marriage. In Al-Andalus, the Islamic territories of medieval Spain, marriage customs reflect not just different religious traditions, but entirely different assumptions about the relationship between individual desire and social obligation. Here in the Emirate of Córdoba, where the call to prayer mingles with church bells and the scent of orange blossoms drifts through marble courtyards, Fatima bint Yusuf faces choices that would be unimaginable to her Christian contemporaries across the Pyrenees. As the daughter of a wealthy Andalusi silk merchant, she lives in a world where Islamic law grants women property rights that won't appear in Christian Europe for centuries, yet where her marriage will still be arranged according to principles that prioritize family honor above personal desire. The morning sun filters through the geometric patterns of the mashrabia screen in her father's house, casting intricate shadows on the tiled floor where Fatima sits with her mother, discussing the marriage proposal that arrived yesterday from the family of Ahmad ibn Muhammad, a young scholar from Seville whose reputation for learning has reached even their prosperous neighborhood in Córdoba. The proposal itself follows forms that would seem familiar to Christian families, but the details reveal a different world entirely. Under Islamic law, Fatima will retain ownership of her dowry throughout her marriage, a protection unknown to Christian wives who surrender all property to their husbands upon wedding. The mahar, the dower that Ahmad's family will pay to her, becomes her personal property, insurance against widowhood or divorce that no husband can touch. It's a system that recognizes women as legal persons in ways that Christian canon law explicitly denies, yet it operates within social structures that can be just as restrictive as anything found in Christian Europe. The negotiations between the families unfold in the formal reception hall of her father's house, where men from both sides discuss not just financial arrangements, but questions of religious observance, family reputation, and scholarly achievement that reflect the intellectual culture of Al-Andalus. Ahmad's father emphasizes his son's memorization of the Quran, his study of philosophy and mathematics, his potential for advancement in the Umayyad court. These aren't just personal accomplishments, but family assets that will benefit any woman fortunate enough to marry him. Fatima herself remains secluded during these negotiations, observing from behind carved wooden screens that allow her to see without being seen. This architectural feature, found throughout the Islamic world, creates a space where women can participate in family decisions while maintaining the physical separation that Islamic custom demands between unrelated men and women. She can hear every word, evaluate every gesture, form her own opinions about the man who might become her husband, but she cannot speak directly to him until after their marriage contract is signed. The courtship that develops between Fatima and Ahmad operates according to rules that balance Islamic teachings about modesty with the practical need for couples to know something about each other before marriage. They exchange letters written in the elaborate calligraphy that marks educated Muslims, poems composed according to classical Arabic forms that allow personal expression within traditional structures. Their communication is mediated by family members and conducted in public spaces, but it's genuine communication nonetheless. When they finally meet face to face, it's in the presence of both families during the formal signing of the marriage contract. The nikah ceremony takes place, not in a mosque, but in Fatima's family home, with the imam present to ensure religious correctness, but the families themselves managing the practical arrangements. The contract they sign is far more detailed than its Christian equivalent, specifying not just financial obligations, but the wife's rights to education, to maintain her own business interests, to visit her family, even to initiate divorce under certain circumstances. The wedding celebration that follows reflects the sophisticated culture of Al-Andalus, where Islamic, Christian, and Jewish traditions have blended to create something uniquely Iberian. The feast includes dishes that would be familiar across the Mediterranean, but prepared with spices and techniques that reflect centuries of cultural exchange. Musicians play instruments that trace their origins to Persia, Byzantium, and North Africa, while poets recite verses in Arabic, Hebrew, and the emerging Romance dialects that will eventually become Spanish. But perhaps the most striking difference between Islamic and Christian wedding traditions lies in their approach to the consummation of marriage. While Christian couples face the bedding ceremony with its public witness and community involvement, Islamic tradition emphasizes privacy and dignity in the most intimate aspects of married life. The couple retires to chambers that have been prepared with rose petals and incense, blessed by prayers, but protected from the intrusive curiosity that characterizes Christian bedding ceremonies. The early days of Fatima and Ahmad's marriage unfold within the distinctive rhythms of Islamic domestic life, where the separation of male and female spaces creates opportunities for women to exercise authority that might surprise Christian observers. Fatima manages not just household affairs, but extensive business interests inherited from her mother, conducting trade with other women across the Islamic world, while maintaining the modest appearance that Islamic law requires. Her relationship with Ahmad develops through conversations that range across philosophy, poetry, and theology in ways that reflect the intellectual equality that Islamic tradition, at least in theory, accords to educated women. They discuss the commentaries of Averroes, debate questions of Quranic interpretation, share books copied in the libraries of Cordoba and Baghdad. Their marriage becomes a meeting of minds as well as bodies, an intellectual partnership that complements their emotional and physical relationship. The children who bless their union enter a world where education is prized above almost everything else, where libraries contain works in dozens of languages, where the pursuit of knowledge is seen as a religious obligation for both men and women. Sons and daughters alike learn to read and write, study mathematics and astronomy, memorize poetry and legal principles. The assumption that learning enhances, rather than threatens family stability, creates educational opportunities that won't appear in Christian Europe for centuries. Yet this intellectual paradise operates within social constraints that can be just as limiting as those found in Christian societies. Fatima's business activities, while legally protected, must be conducted within the bounds of female modesty. Her scholarly interests, while encouraged, cannot extend to the public teaching roles reserved for men. Her marriage, while based on some degree of personal choice, still serves family interests that transcend individual preferences. The contrast between Islamic and Christian marriage customs becomes particularly stark when we consider their different approaches to divorce and remarriage. While Christian doctrine increasingly insists on the absolute indissolubility of marriage, Islamic law provides multiple paths to divorce, some initiated by husbands, others by wives, all regulated by detailed legal procedures designed to protect the interests of both parties and any children involved. When Ahmad travels to Baghdad on scholarly business, leaving Fatima alone for months at a time, their separation tests their marriage in ways that reveal both the strengths and weaknesses of Islamic domestic arrangements. Fatima's legal and financial independence allows her to manage family affairs without the constant male supervision that Christian wives require. But her social isolation, confined to female company and domestic spaces, creates emotional challenges that no amount of legal protection can address. Their reunion, when it finally occurs, brings not just personal joy, but renewed appreciation for the companionate marriage that Islamic tradition encourages alongside its legal protections. The letters they've exchanged during Ahmad's absence reveal a relationship that balances intellectual respect with genuine affection, religious devotion with human passion, individual fulfillment with family obligation. The children of their marriage will grow up in a world that's changing rapidly around them, as Christian kingdoms push southward and the tolerant pluralism of Al-Andalus gives way to more rigid orthodoxies on all sides. The marriage customs that shaped their parents' union will survive in some forms, but adapt to new circumstances, as Islamic Spain gradually disappears and new patterns of cultural interaction emerge. As our journey through medieval marriage continues, we find ourselves drawn northward once again, to the mist-shrouded landscapes of Scotland, where Celtic traditions blend with Norman innovations to create marriage customs that seem both ancient and startlingly modern. Here, in the Highlands where clan loyalty matters more than royal decree, we encounter Moira MacLeod, daughter of a Highland chief whose marriage will determine not just her personal fate, but the political alliances that could mean peace or war for her entire clan. The Great Hall of Castle Dunvegan echoes with the sound of heated discussion as clan elders debate the marriage proposal that's arrived from the MacDonalds. Their traditional rivals whose offer of alliance through marriage could end generations of cattle raids and border disputes. Moira sits silent beside the massive stone fireplace, her red hair catching the flickering light as she listens to men debate her future, with the same intensity they'd bring to planning a military campaign. Scottish marriage customs in the 14th century operate according to principles that blend Celtic tradition with Norman feudalism and canon law, creating a system that's more flexible than what we find in England or France, but no less complex in its implications. The concept of handfasting, a provisional marriage that allows couples to live together for a year and a day before committing to permanent union, provides options that would scandalise Southern Europeans, but seems perfectly practical to Highland Scots facing harsh winters and uncertain harvests. The proposal from young Alasdair MacDonald comes not just with offers of cattle and silver, but with promises of mutual defence that could reshape the balance of power across the Western Highlands. His clan controls strategic sea routes to the Hebrides, while Moira's father commands mountain passes that control access to the interior. Their marriage would create a power block that could challenge even the authority of the Scottish crown, a possibility that makes their personal compatibility seem almost irrelevant beside the political stakes involved. Yet Highland culture, for all its warrior ethos and clan loyalty, maintains traditions that grant women more agency in marriage decisions than they enjoy in more civilized regions. Celtic law recognizes multiple forms of marriage, from the formal church ceremony preferred by Norman nobles to temporary arrangements that can be dissolved by mutual consent. This flexibility reflects the harsh realities of Highland life, where survival often depends more on practical partnerships than romantic ideals. The negotiation process reveals the distinctive character of Scottish marriage customs, where personal honour and clan reputation carry more weight than pure financial calculation. Alastair's family must demonstrate not just their wealth, but their courage, their loyalty to allies, their reliability in keeping oaths. Moira's value lies not just in her dowry, but in her family's military strength, their strategic position, their reputation for producing strong heirs who can lead men in battle. The handfasting ceremony that follows reflects these hybrid traditions, taking place neither in a church nor at a castle door, but on the ancient stone circle that marks the boundary between MacLeod and MacDonald lands. The location itself carries symbolic weight, suggesting a marriage that transcends clan boundaries, while respecting the ancient spirits that Highland Scots believe inhabit their landscape. Moira and Alastair stand before the assembled clans as the sun sets behind the mountains, their hands bound together with cords of silk and leather, while a Celtic priest speaks blessings in Gaelic and Latin. The ceremony blends Christian prayers with older invocations that call upon the land itself to witness their union. They drink from the same cup of heather ale, share bread baked with grain from both territories, exchange rings carved with Celtic knots that symbolize the eternal nature of their commitment. But the most distinctive element of their handfasting is its provisional character. For the next year and a day, Moira and Alastair will live as husband and wife, but either can withdraw from the marriage if it proves incompatible or unsuccessful. This arrangement, condemned by church authorities, but accepted by Highland custom, reflects a practical understanding that marriages forced by political necessity don't always produce the cooperation and affection that successful alliances require. The year of trial marriage that follows tests both their personal compatibility and their family's ability to work together effectively. Moira moves between her father's castle and Alastair's island stronghold, learning to navigate the complex relationships that bind Highland society together. She must prove herself not just as a wife, but as a clan leader, capable of inspiring loyalty and managing the intricate web of obligations that define Highland politics. Their relationship develops against the backdrop of cattle raids and clan gatherings, feast days and military campaigns that reveal character in ways that peaceful courtship never could. Moira watches Alastair lead men in battle, sees how he treats defeated enemies, observes his judgment in settling disputes between his followers. Alastair, in turn, evaluates Moira's courage during a siege, her wisdom in managing scarce resources, her skill at maintaining clan morale during difficult times. The intimacy that grows between them reflects the distinctive character of Highland marriage, where partnership in danger creates bonds that transcend mere physical attraction or political convenience. They share not just a bed, but responsibility for hundreds of lives, not just personal affection, but mutual dependence in matters of life and death. Their marriage becomes a military alliance written in flesh and blood, tested by shared hardship and proven through mutual support. The birth of their first child, a son born during the harsh Highland winter, transforms their provisional arrangement into something deeper and more permanent. The baby represents not just their personal happiness, but the future of both clans. the living symbol of an alliance that could reshape Highland politics for generations. His first cry in the castle's great hall brings cheers from warriors who see in him the promise of continued strength and unity. When the year and a day of handfasting ends, Moira and Alasdair face the choice that will determine their future and their family's fate. They can formalize their marriage in a Christian ceremony that will make their union indissoluble, or they can part peacefully and seek other alliances. The decision involves not just their personal feelings, but complex calculations about clan interests, military necessities, and political opportunities that extend far beyond their individual preferences. Their choice to proceed with formal marriage takes place in the Abbey of Iona, the sacred island where Celtic Christianity first took root in Scotland. The ceremony blends Norman ritual with Highland tradition, creating a service that satisfies church requirements while honouring the customs that gave their relationship its foundation. The abbot who performs the ceremony speaks of marriage as a sacrament, but the clan bards who celebrate afterward sing of hand-fasting as an ancient wisdom that allows love to grow naturally, rather than forcing it into predetermined forms. The marriage feast that follows reveals the distinctive character of Highland hospitality, where generosity and courage are valued above refined manners or courtly sophistication. The great hall fills with the sound of pipes and drums, the clash of swords in ritual combat, the voices of storytellers reciting the genealogies that bind Highland families to their ancestral lands. Moira and Alasdair preside over celebrations that last for 3 days and nights, cementing alliances and creating memories that will sustain their marriage through whatever challenges the future might bring. Their wedding night takes place not in the public ceremony that marks noble marriages elsewhere, but in the privacy that Highland custom grants to couples who've already proven their compatibility through a year of shared life. The intimacy they share reflects not nervous anticipation, but mature affection deepened by genuine partnership and mutual respect. They come together not as strangers fulfilling dynastic obligations, but as partners who've chosen each other after careful consideration of both heart and mind. The early years of their formal marriage unfold against the backdrop of changing times, as Scottish kings attempt to impose southern customs on Highland clans and English armies threaten the independence that Highland warriors have defended for centuries. Moira and Alasdair's alliance proves its worth not just in cattle raids and clan disputes, but in the larger struggle for Scottish freedom that will define their generation's legacy. Their children grow up bilingual in Gaelic and Norman French, equally comfortable with Highland traditions and Southern innovations, prepared to navigate a changing world while maintaining the clan loyalties that define their identity. The marriage that began as a political alliance becomes a love story that encompasses not just personal happiness, but cultural preservation and political resistance. The success of their handfasting experiment influences other Highland families to adopt similar practices, creating a distinctively Scottish approach to marriage that balances individual choice with family interest, romantic feeling with political necessity. Their relationship demonstrates that medieval marriage could adapt to local conditions and cultural values, while maintaining its essential functions of creating families and building communities. Yet even in the relatively progressive world of Highland Scotland, the constraints of medieval society shape and limit the possibilities available to married couples. Moira's authority, while greater than that of women in more conventional medieval societies, still operates within frameworks that ultimately privilege male leadership and patriarchal succession. Her influence depends largely on her success in producing male heirs and her ability to work through male relatives rather than exercising direct power in her own right. The clan system that grants Highland women unusual freedom in some areas imposes rigid constraints in others, defining identity and loyalty in ways that can override personal preference and individual ambition. Moira's marriage to Alasdair may have been based on genuine choice and mutual affection, but it also serves clan interests that transcend their individual happiness and could, in different circumstances, require personal sacrifices that no amount of love could make acceptable. As we trace the various forms that medieval marriage takes across different regions and social classes, we begin to see patterns that transcend specific customs and reveal universal human needs and desires. Whether in the merchant palaces of Venice, the Highland castles of Scotland, or the sun-baked courtyards of Cordoba, marriage serves similar functions while adapting to radically different circumstances. The economic foundations of marriage remain constant, even as their specific forms vary. Dowries and dower rights, inheritance laws, and property arrangements all reflect the basic reality that marriage in the medieval world is as much about survival and prosperity as about love and companionship. The romantic ideals celebrated in courtly literature and popular songs provide emotional colouring for relationships that are ultimately grounded in practical necessity. The religious dimensions of marriage also show remarkable consistency across different Christian traditions and even between Christian and Islamic societies. The belief that marriage is a sacred institution blessed by God, the emphasis on fertility and procreation as divine imperatives, the regulation of sexual behaviour according to religious principles, all reflect shared assumptions about the relationship between human sexuality and divine will. Yet within these broad similarities, we find fascinating variations that reveal how local cultures, economic conditions, and political circumstances shape the most intimate aspects of human experience. The hand-fasting traditions of Scotland, the merchant partnerships of Venice, the intellectual companionship possible in Islamic Cordoba, all represent different solutions to the universal challenge of balancing individual desire with social necessity. The stories of Margot and Henri, Thomas and Alice, Katerina and Marco, Fatima and Ahmad, Moira and Alistair represent millions of similar stories that played out across medieval Europe and the Mediterranean world. Each couple faced unique circumstances and specific challenges, but all navigated the same fundamental tension between personal happiness and social obligation that defines marriage in any era. Their experiences remind us that medieval marriage, for all its constraints and complications, was ultimately about the same human needs that drive modern relationships. The desire for companionship and understanding, the hope for security and prosperity, the longing for children and family continuity, the need for emotional and physical intimacy, all shaped medieval marriages just as they shape contemporary ones. The legal and religious frameworks that governed medieval marriage may seem archaic or oppressive to modern observers, but they reflected serious attempts to address real human problems. How do you ensure that children are properly cared for? How do you prevent the exploitation of vulnerable individuals? How do you balance competing claims of families, communities, and individuals? How do you maintain social stability while allowing for personal happiness? Medieval societies answered these questions differently than we do, but they were asking the same fundamental questions that continue to challenge modern societies. Their solutions reflected their values, their resources, and their understanding of human nature, just as our solutions reflect ours. Neither approach is perfect, but both represent genuine attempts to create institutions that serve human needs while maintaining social order. The evolution of marriage customs across the medieval period also reveals the dynamic nature of social institutions, their capacity to adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining essential functions. The increasing influence of the church, the rise of merchant classes, the development of more sophisticated legal systems, all contributed to gradual changes in how marriage was understood and practiced. These changes weren't always improvements in any simple sense. The Church's insistence on the indissolubility of marriage may have protected some women from arbitrary divorce, but it also trapped others in abusive or incompatible relationships. The rise of merchant wealth may have created new opportunities for some women, but it also subjected others to new forms of economic exploitation. The development of more complex legal systems may have provided better protection for some rights, but it also created new opportunities for those with superior knowledge or resources to manipulate the system. The medieval period reminds us that social progress isn't linear or inevitable, that changes in institutions can have unintended consequences, and that improvements in some areas may come at the cost of deterioration in others. The complexity of medieval marriage customs reflects the complexity of human society itself, the difficulty of creating institutions that serve everyone's interests fairly and effectively. Yet despite all the constraints and complications, the human stories that emerge from medieval marriage records are often remarkably touching and familiar. Husbands and wives who genuinely cared for each other, parents who sacrificed for their children, young people who found ways to express affection within rigid social systems, all remind us that the human capacity for love and connection transcends the particular forms that different societies create to channel and regulate those feelings. The letters, legal documents, and literary works that preserve these stories for us reveal medieval people grappling with the same emotional challenges that face every generation. How do you balance love and duty? How do you maintain intimacy while fulfilling social obligations? How do you protect your children while preparing them for independence? How do you find meaning and happiness within circumstances you can't completely control? Their answers to these questions may seem strange or inadequate to us, just as our answers might seem strange or inadequate to them. But the questions themselves remain constant, reminding us that underneath all the historical differences in customs and institutions lie shared human experiences that connect us across centuries and cultures. As we approach the end of the medieval period and witness the gradual emergence of the social and economic conditions that would eventually produce modern marriage customs, we can see both continuities and changes that illuminate the relationship between past and present. The rise of individualism, the decline of feudalism, the Protestant Reformation, the growth of capitalism, all contributed to transformations in marriage that continue to shape contemporary relationships. Yet many of the basic functions and challenges of marriage remain remarkably consistent across historical periods. The need to balance individual happiness with social responsibility, the challenge of maintaining long-term relationships in changing circumstances, the difficulty of creating institutions that serve diverse needs fairly, all continue to define marriage in our own time, just as they defined it in the medieval world. The medieval experience reminds us that marriage is neither a natural institution that remains unchanged across history, nor a purely arbitrary social construction that can be redefined at will. It's a human institution that reflects both universal needs and particular circumstances, both timeless aspirations and historical limitations. Understanding its medieval forms can help us better understand both its contemporary possibilities and its enduring challenges. The men and women whose stories we followed through the narrow streets of medieval towns and the great halls of feudal castles faced choices that were both constrained by their circumstances and meaningful within their own contexts. Their marriages may not have looked like ours, but they served similar functions and reflected similar hopes. Their struggles and successes, their compromises and achievements, their moments of joy and sorrow, all remind us that the human search for love, security, and meaning transcends the particular forms that different societies create to channel those universal aspirations. In the end, the history of medieval marriage is not just about how people dated and got married in the past, but about how human beings in every era have sought to create relationships and institutions that serve their deepest needs while adapting to the constraints and opportunities of their particular time and place. Their story is our story, told in different words and played out in different circumstances, but fundamentally concerned with the same hopes and fears, the same dreams and disappointments that continue to shape human relationships in every generation. As the medieval world gradually gives way to the early modern period, as feudalism yields to capitalism and religious authority faces challenges from secular learning, The institution of marriage continues to evolve and adapt, but the human needs it serves, the challenges it addresses, and the hopes it embodies remain as constant as the human condition itself. The peasant girl saving copper coins for her marriage fine. The merchant's daughter calculating the commercial value of potential suitors. The noble lady accepting a political alliance while dreaming of romantic love. The Highland warrior choosing a partner through hand fasting. The Islamic scholar finding intellectual companionship in marriage. All represent different approaches to the same fundamental human challenge of creating lasting relationships that serve both individual needs and social purposes. Their experiences remind us that marriage has always been both deeply personal and thoroughly social, both intensely private and inescapably public, both shaped by individual choice and constrained by collective necessity. Understanding their stories helps us better understand our own, revealing both how much and how little has changed in the eternal human quest for love, security, and meaning through the bonds of marriage and family. The medieval world may seem distant and alien to modern observers, but its people face the same basic challenges that continue to define human experience. Their solutions may seem strange or inadequate to us, but they were genuine attempts to address real problems with the resources and understanding available to them. Their stories remind us that every generation must find its own way of balancing competing needs and values, its own way of creating institutions that serve human flourishing while maintaining social stability. In the flickering candlelight of medieval chambers and the golden sunlight of medieval courtyards, in the sacred spaces of churches and the practical spaces of markets and workshops, human beings found ways to love and be loved, to create families and build communities, to find meaning and purpose through relationships that transcended their individual limitations and connected them to something larger than themselves. Their legacy lives on not just in the legal and social institutions they created, but in the human courage and creativity they demonstrated in finding ways to honor both individual dignity and collective responsibility, both personal happiness and social duty, both romantic aspiration and practical necessity. Their story continues in every marriage, every family, every community that seeks to balance these eternal tensions in ways that serve human flourishing and honor human dignity. The medieval world of dating and marriage may be gone forever, but the human needs it served and the human values it embodied continue to shape our own search for love, meaning, and connection in whatever forms the future might bring. In understanding their story, we better understand our own, and in honoring their struggle, we honor the continuing human quest for relationships that serve both heart and mind, both individual fulfillment and collective well-being, both temporal happiness and eternal meaning. The winter of 1342 brings an unusual warmth to the cobblestone streets of Bruges, where the wool merchants have grown wealthy enough to challenge the nobility themselves. In the counting house above her father's shop, 17-year-old Beatrice van der Meer carefully traces her finger along the margins of an illuminated manuscript, not reading the Latin prayers within, but admiring the delicate gold leaf that catches the afternoon light streaming through diamond-paned windows. Her father, Willem, has spent the morning below negotiating with representatives from 3 different guilds, each seeking to arrange a marriage that would bind their commercial interests to his growing textile empire. But Beatrice knows something her suitors don't. Hidden beneath her mattress lies a collection of love letters written in the emerging vernacular Dutch, poems composed by a young journeyman weaver named Peter who works in her father's own workshop. The letters themselves represent a dangerous innovation in medieval courtship. While noble ladies might receive elaborate verses in Latin or French celebrating their unattainable beauty, merchant daughters like Beatrice are beginning to experience something entirely new. Correspondence that speaks directly to their hearts in language they can understand without scholarly translation. Peter's words don't follow the formal structures of courtly love. They speak of shared laughter over morning prayers, of stolen glances during guild processions, of dreams of a partnership that would combine love with practical prosperity. My dearest Beatrice, his latest letter begins, When I see you measuring silk at your father's counter, your fingers moving with such precision and grace, I think not of angels in heaven, but of the earthly paradise we might create together. The cloth I weave grows stronger when I imagine it clothing our future children. The patterns more beautiful when I picture them reflecting in your eyes. Such sentiments would horrify courtly love poets, who insisted that desire must remain forever unfulfilled to maintain its purity. But the emerging merchant class operates according to different principles. Their marriages must combine emotional satisfaction with commercial success, creating partnerships that can weather both market fluctuations and personal crises. Love becomes not an obstacle to practical marriage, but an essential component of it. The challenge facing Beatrice and Peter reflects broader changes sweeping through medieval European society in the 14th century. The rise of urban centres, the growth of commerce, the increasing literacy of non-noble populations all contribute to new possibilities for courtship and marriage that exist alongside but separate from both aristocratic and peasant traditions. In the guild system that governs urban life, marriage serves multiple functions beyond the personal happiness of the couple involved. A weaver who marries his master's daughter gains not just a wife, but potential inheritance of the business, access to commercial networks, and elevated status within the guild hierarchy. The master's daughter, in turn, secures her future prosperity while potentially influencing business decisions in ways that would be impossible for women in purely feudal societies. Yet these new possibilities come with their own constraints and complications. Guild regulations often restrict marriage between members of different crafts, creating a complex web of acceptable and forbidden unions based on professional rather than blood relationships. A goldsmith's daughter might be prohibited from marrying a blacksmith's son, not because of family hostility, but because guild statutes insist that marriage should strengthen rather than complicate professional loyalties. The courtship developing between Beatrice and Peter must navigate these professional considerations alongside the personal and financial factors that influence all medieval marriages. Willem van der Meer's initial resistance to their relationship stems not from class prejudice, but from practical concerns about business continuity. Peter's skill as a weaver is unquestionable, but his lack of capital and established commercial relationships makes him a risky choice for a daughter whose inheritance includes valuable trade connections across Northern Europe. The letters they exchange reveal how young people in medieval urban centres began to develop their own language of romantic expression, distinct from both the elaborate formalities of courtly love and the simple practicalities of peasant courtship. Beatrice writes to Peter in a mixture of Dutch and Latin phrases, demonstrating her education while expressing feelings that no classical author ever imagined women discussing openly. "Beloved friend," one of her letters begins, "you speak of paradise, but I think instead of the workshop where we might labour together, your strong hands guiding mine as we create beauty from simple thread." The Church teaches that marriage is a sacrament, but I believe it might also be a craft, learned through practice and perfected through dedication to shared purposes that transcend our individual limitations. Such practical romanticism reflects the distinctive character of merchant marriages, where love and commerce intertwine in ways that would seem calculating to modern couples, but felt natural to medieval urbanites who understood that survival required both emotional support and economic cooperation. The letters between Beatrice and Peter discuss not just their personal feelings, but their shared vision of how their marriage might contribute to the prosperity of both their families and the guild community that encompasses their working lives. The formal negotiations that eventually lead to their engagement reveal how urban marriage customs had evolved to balance individual choice with collective interests in ways that differed significantly from both noble and peasant practices. Willem van der Meer agrees to consider Peter as a potential son-in-law only after the young weaver demonstrates his commercial potential by designing textile patterns that prove popular with wealthy customers from as far away as London and Paris. The betrothal ceremony that follows combines elements drawn from various medieval traditions, creating a hybrid ritual that captures the complex social position of the urban merchant class. The exchange of rings takes place not in a church or castle, but in the guild hall, with representatives of both the weavers' and merchants' guilds present as witnesses. The couple's vows include not just personal promises, but professional commitments that bind them to maintain the standards and traditions of their respective crafts. The period between betrothal and marriage allows Beatrice and Peter to work together in the family business, testing their compatibility as both romantic partners and business associates. This practical courtship period, while lacking the dramatic intensity of noble love affairs or the simple directness of peasant relationships, provides opportunities for genuine intimacy that many medieval couples never experience. Their collaboration in the workshop reveals aspects of personality and character that formal courtship rituals often conceal. Beatrice proves to have an exceptional eye for colour and pattern, able to predict which designs will appeal to different markets and social classes. Peter demonstrates not just technical skill, but innovative creativity, developing weaving techniques that produce fabrics of unusual beauty and durability. Their professional partnership flourishes alongside their personal relationship, creating a foundation for marriage that combines practical cooperation with genuine affection. The wedding ceremony itself takes place during the spring fair of 1343, when Bruges fills with merchants from across Europe, and the guild halls echo with the sounds of celebration and commerce. The timing isn't accidental. Urban weddings often coincide with major commercial events, creating opportunities for networking and business development that extend far beyond the immediate families involved. The church ceremony follows traditional forms, but the celebration that accompanies it reflects the distinctive culture of medieval urban life. The wedding feast features not just local specialties, but exotic foods imported through the commercial networks that define the merchant class, spices from the Orient, wines from the Mediterranean, delicacies that demonstrate the global reach of Flemish commerce. The gifts presented to the couple include both personal tokens and professional tools, reflecting the dual nature of merchant marriages as both romantic unions and business partnerships. Beatrice receives silk threads in colours she's never seen before, imported from Constantinople and Venice by her father's trading partners. Peter is presented with a loom of exceptional quality, crafted by the finest woodworkers in the guild and capable of producing the complex patterns that will establish his reputation as a master weaver. The bedding ceremony for merchant couples reflects their class's practical approach to most aspects of life, but it also reveals how urban culture was beginning to develop new concepts of privacy and individual dignity. While the basic ritual elements remain similar to those found in other social contexts, the emphasis shifts toward the couple's future prosperity and productivity rather than purely dynastic or fertility concerns. The early months of Beatrice and Peter's marriage unfold against the backdrop of Bruges' commercial calendar, with their personal relationship developing alongside their professional partnership. They work side by side in the expanded workshop that Willem has provided as part of Beatrice's dowry, their daily interactions creating a form of intimacy that transcends purely romantic or sexual connection. Their collaboration produces textiles that quickly gain recognition throughout Northern Europe, establishing their reputation as innovators who combine traditional techniques with creative vision. The success of their professional partnership strengthens their marriage in ways that purely emotional bonds might not sustain, creating mutual respect and shared purpose that complement their personal affection. The children who bless their union enter a world where education and opportunity extend far beyond what most medieval children could imagine. Sons and daughters alike learn to read and calculate, study languages that will serve them in international commerce, develop skills that prepare them for leadership roles in guild organizations that are beginning to challenge traditional aristocratic authority. Yet their story also reveals the limitations that continue to constrain even the most progressive medieval marriages. Beatrice's business activities, while extensive by medieval standards, still operate within legal frameworks that ultimately subordinate her interests to her husband's authority. Her innovations in textile design bring prosperity to their household, but the legal ownership of that prosperity remains vested in Peter's name, according to laws that recognize women as perpetual dependents rather than independent economic actors. The guild system that provides opportunities for social mobility also imposes rigid constraints on personal freedom and individual expression. The couple's success depends not just on their own efforts, but on their ability to maintain relationships with guild officials, satisfy customer expectations, and conform to professional standards that leave little room for genuine innovation or creative risk-taking. Their marriage, while based on genuine affection and mutual respect, still serves family and guild interests that transcend their individual preferences. The children they raise will be expected to marry within acceptable professional circles, maintaining the commercial relationships that support their family's prosperity. Their business decisions must consider not just immediate profit, but long-term effects on guild stability and commercial networks that extend across multiple generations. As the Black Death sweeps across Europe in the late 1340s, fundamentally altering the social and economic structures that define medieval life, Beatrice and Peter's marriage faces challenges that test both their personal bond and their professional partnership. The massive population losses that follow the plague create new opportunities for social mobility, but also disrupt the stable relationships that support commercial success. The labour shortages that result from epidemic mortality give surviving workers unprecedented bargaining power, fundamentally altering the relationship between masters and apprentices that had defined guild organisation for centuries. Peter finds himself in the unusual position of competing for skilled workers rather than selecting from abundant applicants, while Beatrice discovers that her knowledge of international markets has become invaluable as traditional trading relationships collapse and new ones emerge. Their ability to adapt to these changing circumstances reveals both the strengths and limitations of merchant marriages, where success depends on flexible response to unpredictable conditions, but within frameworks that continue to privilege male authority and restrict female independence. Beatrice's contributions prove essential to their survival and prosperity, but they must be channeled through her husband's legal authority and expressed within social conventions that deny her direct recognition or reward. The innovations they develop in response to post-plague conditions influence other merchant families throughout Northern Europe, contributing to gradual changes in marriage customs that reflect the growing importance of urban commercial classes in medieval society. Their example demonstrates that medieval marriage could adapt to new social and economic conditions while maintaining its essential functions of creating families and building communities. Yet their story also reminds us that even the most progressive medieval marriages operated within constraints that would seem unacceptable to modern couples. The merchant class's innovations in marriage practices, like their innovations in business methods, represented evolutionary rather than revolutionary change, working within existing systems to create new possibilities, without fundamentally challenging the assumptions about gender, authority, and family structure that defined medieval society. The workshop that Beatrice and Peter establish in post-plague Bruges becomes a model for other merchant families seeking to balance personal happiness with commercial success, individual fulfillment with family obligation, romantic affection with practical necessity. Their marriage demonstrates that love and business can flourish together when couples share both emotional commitment and professional vision, when personal relationships serve larger purposes while honoring individual dignity and mutual respect. As we move from the bustling workshops of Bruges to the windswept shores of Ireland, we encounter yet another variation on the theme of medieval marriage, one shaped by Celtic traditions that predate Christianity and Norman customs that reflect more recent political changes. Here, in the Kingdom of Leinster during the early 13th century, we meet Bridget O'Brien, daughter of a Gaelic chieftain whose marriage negotiations must balance ancient Irish customs with the feudal obligations imposed by Anglo-Norman conquerors. The Great Hall of her father's dun echoes with heated discussions conducted in a mixture of Irish Gaelic and Norman French, as representatives of three different families debate the political implications of her potential marriage. Each suitor represents not just personal qualities but strategic alliances that could determine whether the O'Brien clan maintains its independence or submits to foreign domination. Irish marriage customs in the 13th century operate according to principles that blend ancient Celtic law with Norman feudalism and Christian doctrine, creating a system that seems chaotic to outsiders, but reflects sophisticated attempts to balance competing demands for loyalty, legitimacy, and survival. The concept of temporary marriage, sanctioned by pre-Christian Irish law but condemned by church authorities, provides flexibility that proves essential in a political environment where alliances shift constantly, and survival often depends on rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. The negotiations surrounding Bridget's marriage reveal the distinctive character of Gaelic society, where women enjoy legal rights and social status that would astonish their counterparts in more conventional medieval cultures. Under traditional Irish law, women can own property, initiate divorce, and participate in political decisions in ways that Norman and English legal systems explicitly prohibit. These ancient rights create possibilities for female agency that survive even under foreign conquest, though often in modified forms that reflect the complex cultural compromises required for political survival. The first suitor under consideration is Donald McCarthy, son of a Kerry chieftain, whose territory remains largely independent of Norman control. His proposal offers the attraction of continued Gaelic autonomy, but also the risks associated with resistance to increasingly powerful foreign forces. Marriage to Donald would allow Bridget to maintain the cultural traditions and legal rights that define her identity, but it might also condemn her to a life of constant warfare and uncertain survival. The second possibility involves Rhodri Fitzgerald, a Norman knight whose Irish mother gives him claims to Gaelic legitimacy while his Norman father provides connections to the colonial administration. This match would offer security and prosperity, but require cultural compromises that could fundamentally alter Bridget's identity and social position. Marriage to a Norman, even one with Irish blood, means accepting legal systems that treat women as perpetual dependents and cultural norms that deny the independence she has always taken for granted. The third option presents perhaps the most complex choice of all: Muireann O'Sullivan, a Gaelic nobleman who has accepted Norman overlordship while maintaining Irish customs within his own territory. His proposal represents a middle path between resistance and submission, cultural preservation, and political adaptation, but it also embodies the contradictions and compromises that define colonial Ireland. The deliberations that surround these choices reveal how marriage in medieval Ireland serves functions that extend far beyond personal happiness or even family interest. Bridget's decision will affect not just her own future, but the survival strategies of her entire clan, their ability to maintain cultural identity while adapting to political realities that no individual family can control or significantly influence. The ancient Irish legal system known as Brehon law provides frameworks for marriage that seem startlingly modern in their recognition of women's rights and individual autonomy. Under traditional Irish custom, marriage contracts specify not just financial arrangements, but detailed provisions for property ownership, inheritance rights, and grounds for divorce that grant women protections unknown in contemporary European legal systems. These legal protections reflect cultural attitudes toward women and marriage that developed over centuries of Celtic civilization before Christian influence began to alter traditional practices. Irish society recognized multiple forms of marriage, from temporary unions that could be dissolved by mutual consent to permanent alliances that created binding obligations between entire kinship groups. The flexibility of these arrangements reflected practical recognition that survival in a harsh environment often required rapid adaptation to changing circumstances. The influence of Christianity on Irish marriage customs creates tensions that complicate every aspect of courtship and family formation. Church authorities insist on the indissolubility of marriage and the subordination of wives to husbands, principles that conflict directly with traditional Irish practices that grant women extensive legal rights and recognize divorce as a legitimate solution to incompatible marriages. These conflicts between Christian doctrine and Irish custom create opportunities for creative compromise, but also sources of confusion and contradiction that affect every aspect of family life. Couples might participate in Christian wedding ceremonies while privately maintaining marriage contracts based on traditional Irish law. Children might be raised according to Christian moral principles while inheriting property according to Gaelic legal traditions that recognize female ownership and maternal lineage. The Norman conquest adds another layer of complexity to these already intricate cultural negotiations. Norman legal systems, based on feudal principles that emphasize male authority and patrilineal inheritance, conflict with both Irish custom and Christian doctrine in ways that create new forms of uncertainty and opportunity for those skilled enough to navigate competing legal frameworks. Brigid's education reflects these cultural complexities, preparing her to function effectively within multiple legal and social systems while maintaining her identity as an Irish woman and a Christian believer. She speaks Irish Gaelic with the fluency of native birth, Norman French with the precision required for diplomatic negotiations, and Latin with the accuracy necessary for understanding legal documents and religious texts that govern different aspects of her life. Her knowledge of traditional Irish law proves particularly valuable as her family evaluates potential marriage arrangements. She understands the intricate provisions of Brehon law regarding property rights, inheritance arrangements, and grounds for divorce that will determine her legal status regardless of which suitor her family ultimately chooses. This knowledge gives her influence in marriage negotiations that women in more conventional medieval societies could never exercise. The courtship customs that develop around these negotiations blend elements from various cultural traditions, creating hybrid practices that reflect the multicultural character of medieval Ireland. Brigid receives gifts that follow both Gaelic and Norman conventions. Silver brooches crafted according to traditional Irish designs alongside silk scarves imported through Norman trading networks. Books of Celtic poetry written in Irish alongside French romances that celebrate courtly love. The festivals and gatherings that provide opportunities for courtship reflect similar cultural mixing. At autumn, harvest celebrations, Brigid might dance to traditional Irish music while wearing a gown cut according to Norman fashion. During religious ceremonies, she participates in Christian rituals conducted in Latin while maintaining private devotions to Celtic saints whose worship predates Roman Christianity. These cultural negotiations require extraordinary skill and sensitivity, as a misstep in either direction could have serious political consequences. Appearing too Irish might alienate Norman authorities who support her family needs for survival. Seeming too Norman might undermine her credibility within Gaelic society and compromise her father's position as a traditional chieftain. The marriage negotiations themselves become exercises in diplomatic complexity that would challenge experienced ambassadors. Representatives of each suitor's family must demonstrate not just their candidate's personal qualities, but his ability to navigate the political and cultural minefields that define life in colonial Ireland. Military strength, commercial connections, legal knowledge, cultural sensitivity, religious orthodoxy, all become factors in evaluations that determine not just Brigid's personal future, but her family's survival strategy. The decision-making process reveals the distinctive character of Gaelic society, where women's voices carry weight in family councils and individual preferences receive consideration alongside political and economic factors. Bridget participates directly in discussions about her future marriage, expressing opinions and asking questions that would be unthinkable for women in more conventional medieval cultures. Her preference gradually emerges for Muireann O'Sullivan, the Gaelic nobleman who has found ways to balance Irish identity with Norman overlordship. Their conversations during supervised meetings reveal intellectual compatibility and shared commitment to preserving Irish culture within frameworks that ensure political survival. Their relationship develops through discussions of poetry and law, music and politics, that demonstrate mutual respect and genuine affection alongside strategic calculation. The betrothal ceremony that formalizes their engagement combines elements from Irish, Norman, and Christian traditions in ways that create something uniquely medieval Irish. The exchange of gifts follows ancient Celtic customs, while the formal contracts reflect Norman legal requirements and Christian blessings acknowledge church authority over marriage. The result is a hybrid ritual that satisfies competing demands while creating something new and distinctively Irish. The period between betrothal and marriage allows Bridget and Muireann to develop their relationship through shared participation in the cultural and political activities that define Irish noble life. They attend poetry competitions where traditional Irish verses compete with imported French romances. They participate in legal proceedings where Brehon law intersects with Norman jurisprudence. They join hunting expeditions that combine recreation with political networking and military preparation. Their wedding ceremony reflects the same cultural complexity that characterized their courtship, taking place simultaneously in a Christian church and a traditional Irish sacred grove, with priests and druids offering competing but complementary blessings. The celebration that follows includes traditional Irish music and Norman-influenced dancing, ancient Celtic foods, and imported continental delicacies, gifts that reflect both indigenous craftsmanship and international commercial connections. The marriage that develops between Bridget and Muireann demonstrates how medieval couples could create successful relationships within even the most complex and contradictory cultural circumstances. Their partnership combines genuine affection with political calculation, cultural preservation with practical adaptation, individual happiness with family obligation in ways that serve multiple purposes simultaneously. Their household becomes a center of cultural synthesis, where Irish traditions blend with Norman innovations and Christian teachings to create something distinctively medieval Irish. The children they raise grow up trilingual and bicultural, equally comfortable with Gaelic poetry and Norman chivalry, traditional Irish law and Christian theology, prepared to navigate the complex world they inherit while maintaining the cultural identity that defines their deepest sense of self. Yet their story also reveals the costs and compromises that colonial situations impose on even the most successful cultural negotiations. Bridget's legal rights, while greater than those of women in purely Norman or English societies, remain constrained by the political realities that limit all Irish autonomy under foreign rule. Her cultural identity, while maintained through conscious effort and creative adaptation, can never be as secure or uncomplicated as it would have been in an independent Gaelic society. The success of their marriage depends not just on personal compatibility and mutual affection, but on their ability to maintain complex balances between competing loyalties and conflicting demands that could shift suddenly with changes in political circumstances beyond their control. Their relationship must serve not just their individual happiness, but the survival strategies of extended families and entire communities whose futures depend on successful navigation of colonial relationships. As we witness their story unfold against the backdrop of medieval Ireland's complex cultural landscape, we begin to understand how marriage customs adapt to political circumstances while maintaining essential functions of creating families and building communities. Their experience demonstrates that love and commitment can flourish even within the most challenging and contradictory social conditions, but only through constant negotiation and creative compromise that requires extraordinary skill and determination. The children of their marriage inherit both the opportunities and burdens that define life in colonial Ireland. Growing up with multiple cultural identities that provide flexibility and resilience, but also create internal tensions that will shape their own approaches to marriage and family formation. Their story continues in the countless other Irish families who found ways to preserve cultural identity while adapting to political realities that no individual choice could significantly alter. Meanwhile, in the sun-drenched valleys of Provence, where troubadour songs drift across lavender fields and the courts of love hold session beneath flowering almond trees, we encounter a very different expression of medieval romance. Here, in the sophisticated cultural world of southern France during the 12th century, Aliénor de Montpellier embodies the pinnacle of courtly love tradition, while navigating marriage customs that seem to elevate romantic feeling above all other considerations. The castle of her father, Guillaume de Montpellier, has become a centre of troubadour culture, where the greatest poet-musicians of the age gather to compete in elaborate contests of verbal skill and emotional refinement. The walls echo with verses composed in the emerging Occitan language, celebrating forms of love that would seem impossibly idealized to more practical medieval couples, but represent the highest achievements of human feeling to the sophisticated nobility of Languedoc. Aliénor herself serves as both inspiration and judge for these poetic competitions. Her education in classical literature and contemporary philosophy, preparing her to evaluate not just the technical skill of competing verses, but their emotional authenticity and spiritual significance. The troubadours who seek her favour understand that winning her approval requires not just artistic ability, but genuine insight into the nature of love itself. The courtly love tradition that flourishes in her father's court operates according to principles that seem to invert normal medieval relationships between men and women, granting ladies authority over their suitors while celebrating desire that must remain forever unfulfilled. The elaborate codes of conduct that govern these relationships create a parallel social world where emotional intensity and artistic achievement matter more than political power or economic advantage. Yet beneath the surface of this romantic idealism lie the same practical considerations that influence marriage arrangements throughout medieval Europe. Aliénor's eventual marriage will serve political and economic purposes that transcend personal preference, while the troubadours who compete for her attention often have their own strategic reasons for seeking favour from one of Provence's wealthiest and most influential families. The courtship that develops around Aliénor follows the intricate patterns established by decades of troubadour tradition, where each gesture carries symbolic meaning and every exchange of gifts or glances becomes part of an elaborate ritual performance. The knights who seek her favour must demonstrate not just military prowess, but poetic skill, not just noble birth, but emotional refinement, not just physical courage, but spiritual devotion. The most persistent of her suitors is Raymond de Toulouse, heir to one of the most powerful noble houses in southern France, whose verses combine technical mastery with genuine passion in ways that distinguish him from more conventional courtly lovers. His pursuit of Aliénor unfolds over several years, following the prescribed stages of courtly love from initial worship, through growing intimacy to the spiritual union that represents the tradition's highest achievement. Their relationship develops through exchanges of increasingly sophisticated poetry, where coded references and symbolic imagery allow them to express feelings that direct communication would make dangerous or inappropriate. The songs that Raymond composes for Aliénor become models for other troubadours, establishing conventions that will influence European literature for centuries, while creating a private language of love that belongs uniquely to their relationship. The courts of love that meet regularly in Aliénor's father's castle provide forums where the principles and practices of courtly romance receive formal discussion and judgment. These elaborate gatherings, presided over by noble ladies who serve as experts in matters of the heart, hear cases involving disputed claims of love, competing suitors, and questions of romantic ethics that would seem absurd to more practical medieval minds, but represent serious moral and aesthetic concerns to courtly society. Eleanor's participation in these courts prepares her to understand the complex emotional and social dynamics that courtly love creates, while also revealing the tensions between romantic idealism and practical necessity that complicate even the most refined medieval relationships. The judgments rendered in these cases often reflect attempts to balance individual desire with social obligation, personal fulfillment with family duty, romantic aspiration with political reality. The marriage negotiations that eventually begin between the Montpellier and Toulouse families reveal how even the most romantically sophisticated medieval nobles must ultimately subordinate personal feeling to dynastic necessity. Despite the years of courtly courtship between Eleanor and Raymond, their formal betrothal depends on complex calculations involving territorial rights, military alliances, and commercial privileges that have little to do with the poetic devotion celebrated in troubadour verse. The contrast between the idealized love portrayed in courtly poetry and the practical arrangements that govern actual marriage creates tensions that define much of Eleanor's experience. She has been educated to value emotional refinement and spiritual connection above material considerations. Yet her marriage must serve family interests that treat romantic feeling as a pleasant but ultimately irrelevant luxury. The betrothal ceremony itself reflects these contradictions, combining elaborate celebrations of courtly love with hard-headed negotiations over dowries and inheritance rights. The troubadours who have spent years celebrating Eleanor's beauty and virtue suddenly find themselves composing verses that praise her commercial value and political usefulness, transforming romantic poetry into diplomatic propaganda. Yet within these constraints, Eleanor and Raymond discover that their years of courtly courtship have created genuine intimacy and mutual understanding that serves them well in the practical challenges of married life. The emotional vocabulary they developed through poetic exchange provides them with ways of maintaining romantic connection while fulfilling the dynastic obligations that define their social roles. Their wedding celebration becomes one of the great cultural events of 12th century Provence, attracting troubadours and nobles from across southern France and beyond. The ceremony combines religious ritual with courtly spectacle, creating a synthesis of sacred and secular elements that captures the distinctive character of Provençal culture during its golden age. The marriage that develops between Eleanor and Raymond demonstrates how courtly love traditions could enhance, rather than undermine, practical medieval marriages when couples possess the education and cultural sophistication necessary to integrate romantic idealism with social reality. Their relationship combines the emotional intensity celebrated in troubadour poetry with the mutual respect and shared purpose that successful partnerships require. Their court becomes a model for other noble families seeking to balance romantic culture with political effectiveness, demonstrating that artistic refinement and emotional sophistication could serve dynastic interests while enriching personal relationships. The troubadours who gather in their hall continue to celebrate idealized love while also composing verses that support the family's political objectives and commercial interests. The children who bless their union grow up surrounded by the highest achievements of medieval culture, educated not just in practical skills necessary for noble life, but in the artistic and intellectual traditions that make Provence the envy of Europe. Their sons learn to compose poetry alongside military tactics, while their daughters master the complex social skills necessary to preside over courts of love while managing vast household economies. Yet even in this most culturally sophisticated environment, the fundamental constraints of medieval society continue to shape and limit individual possibilities. Eleanor's influence, while greater than that of women in less refined courts, still operates within frameworks that ultimately privilege male authority and patriarchal succession. Her contributions to troubadour culture and courtly society, while celebrated and influential, must be channeled through her husband's political authority and expressed within social conventions that deny her independent recognition. The Albigensian crusade that devastates Provence in the early 13th century brings violent end to the cultural flowering that made courtly love possible. demonstrating how quickly political circumstances can destroy even the most sophisticated social achievements. Eleanor and Raymond's court, which had seemed to represent the pinnacle of medieval cultural refinement, suddenly becomes a target for religious zealots who see courtly love as heretical deviation from Christian orthodoxy. Their survival during this period of persecution requires abandoning many of the cultural practices that had defined their identity, adapting to harsher political realities that leave little room for the romantic idealism that had flourished during more peaceful times. The troubadours who had celebrated their love scatter across Europe, carrying Provençal traditions to new courts, while their homeland falls under the control of northern French nobles, who have little sympathy for southern sophistication. The transformation of their marriage during this crisis reveals both the strengths and limitations of relationships based on courtly love principles. The emotional intimacy they had developed through years of poetic exchange helps them support each other through trauma and loss. But the idealized vision of love they had cultivated proves inadequate to the brutal realities of religious war and political conquest. Their adaptation to changed circumstances requires developing new forms of partnership that emphasize practical cooperation and mutual protection rather than romantic refinement and cultural achievement. The marriage that survives the destruction of Provençal civilization becomes something different from what it had been, more pragmatic and less idealistic, but perhaps more genuinely intimate because tested by shared adversity. The legacy of their relationship survives in the scattered verses that former troubadours carry to distant courts, in the marriage customs that other noble families adopt to balance romance with reality, in the children who remember their parents' partnership as proof that love and duty could coexist even in the darkest times. Their story becomes part of the larger narrative of how medieval marriage evolved to meet changing circumstances while preserving essential human needs for connection, companionship, and hope. As we approach the end of our journey through the intricate world of medieval dating and marriage, we find ourselves standing in the Cathedral of Notre-Dame de Paris on a crisp December morning in 1348, where the wedding of Marie de Valois to Henri de Bourbon represents both the culmination of centuries of evolving marriage customs and the beginning of changes that will eventually transform European society beyond recognition. The cathedral itself, recently completed after nearly 2 centuries of construction, stands as a monument to medieval achievement in stone and glass, its soaring arches and jeweled windows creating a sacred space that seems to bridge earth and heaven. The wedding ceremony taking place within its walls brings together representatives from across Europe, their presence a testament to the political importance of this union and the sophisticated diplomatic networks that marriage continues to serve in the medieval world. Marie herself embodies the complex inheritance of medieval womanhood, educated in classical languages and contemporary philosophy, skilled in the arts of governance and diplomacy, yet still constrained by legal and social systems that ultimately subordinate her brilliance to her husband's authority. Her marriage to Henri represents the careful balance between individual accomplishment and dynastic duty that defines noble life in the 14th century. The ceremony they share combines elements drawn from centuries of Christian tradition with innovations that reflect changing attitudes toward marriage and individual dignity. The exchange of vows emphasizes not just obedience and duty, but partnership and mutual support, while the liturgical prayers acknowledge both the sacramental nature of marriage and its practical importance for social stability and personal happiness. The celebration that follows reveals how far medieval marriage customs have evolved since the simple ceremonies of earlier centuries, incorporating artistic and cultural elements that transform weddings into comprehensive expressions of social values and aesthetic achievement. The music performed includes both ancient liturgical chants and contemporary polyphonic compositions that push the boundaries of musical possibility, while the decorations combine traditional Christian symbolism with secular motifs that celebrate human love alongside divine blessing. The feast that accompanies the celebration demonstrates the global reach of late medieval commerce, featuring delicacies imported from across the known world and prepared according to recipes that blend local traditions with international influences. The guests themselves represent the cosmopolitan character of 14th century European nobility, comfortable with multiple languages and cultural traditions, at home in courts from London to Constantinople. Yet, even as we witness this apparent triumph of medieval civilization, we can sense the approaching changes that will fundamentally alter the world that produce such sophisticated expressions of human culture and social organization. The plague that has already begun its devastating sweep across Europe will destroy not just individual lives, but entire social structures, creating opportunities for change that seemed impossible just decades earlier. The economic disruptions that follow epidemic mortality will undermine the feudal relationships that provided stability for centuries, while the demographic collapse will force fundamental reconsiderations of marriage customs, inheritance laws, and social hierarchies that had seemed as permanent as the stone cathedrals where wedding ceremonies took place. The religious upheavals that will eventually fragment medieval Christendom are already visible in the theological debates and institutional conflicts that complicate even the most traditional religious ceremonies. The authority of the Church over marriage and family life, which had grown steadily throughout the medieval period, faces challenges from secular rulers and emerging intellectual movements that question established doctrines and traditional practices. The rise of vernacular literature and popular culture threatens the monopoly that Latin learning had long maintained over intellectual life, creating new possibilities for individual expression and personal choice that will eventually transform courtship customs and marriage expectations. The songs and stories that celebrate romantic love are beginning to reach audiences beyond the narrow circles of court society, spreading ideas about individual fulfillment and personal happiness that challenge traditional assumptions about duty and social obligation. Yet as we witness Marie and Henri beginning their married life together, we also see the enduring human needs and desires that transcend historical change and connect medieval couples to lovers in every era. Their hopes for companionship and understanding, their dreams of children and family continuity, their desire for security and prosperity, all echo the aspirations that have motivated marriage throughout human history. The legal and religious frameworks that govern their union may seem archaic to modern observers, but they represent serious attempts to address perennial human challenges that continue to complicate relationships in every generation. How do you balance individual happiness with social responsibility? How do you create institutions that serve diverse needs fairly and effectively? How do you preserve valuable traditions while adapting to changing circumstances? The medieval solutions to these questions may seem inadequate or oppressive by contemporary standards, but they emerged from genuine efforts to create marriage customs that would serve human flourishing while maintaining social stability. The constraints they imposed on individual choice reflected not arbitrary prejudice, but careful calculations about what medieval societies could afford in terms of personal freedom and social experimentation. The opportunities they provided for love and companionship within structured frameworks demonstrated remarkable creativity in balancing competing demands and conflicting values. The courtly love tradition that flourished in Provence, the merchant partnerships that developed in Italian cities, the hand-fasting customs that persisted in Celtic regions, all represent different approaches to the same fundamental challenge of creating marriages that serve both individual and collective needs. The stories we have followed throughout our journey, from Margot's simple peasant wedding to Marie's elaborate royal ceremony, reveal the extraordinary diversity of medieval marriage customs, while highlighting the common human experiences that unite couples across centuries and cultures. Each relationship faced unique circumstances and specific challenges, but all involve the same basic negotiation between personal desire and social necessity that defines marriage in any historical period. The peasant couples who saved copper coins to pay marriage fines understood as clearly as royal families negotiating international alliances that marriage serves purposes beyond individual happiness, that personal relationships must contribute to larger social goals while honoring individual dignity and human worth. Their solutions to these challenges may have differed dramatically in scale and sophistication, but they reflected similar recognition that successful marriages require both emotional satisfaction and practical cooperation. The merchant families who balanced commercial advantage with personal affection discovered that love and business could enhance rather than undermine each other when couples shared both romantic commitment and professional vision. Their innovations in marriage customs reflected the dynamic character of medieval society, its capacity to adapt traditional institutions to new social and economic conditions, while preserving essential functions and values. The noble families who used marriage to create political alliances while maintaining cultural traditions demonstrated that even the most calculated unions could develop into relationships of genuine partnership and mutual respect when couples possessed the education and social skills necessary to navigate complex obligations while nurturing personal connection. The religious communities that regulated marriage through canon law and sacramental theology provided frameworks that protected vulnerable individuals while maintaining social order, even when their solutions created new forms of constraint and contradiction. Their insistence on free consent as the basis for valid marriage represented revolutionary recognition of individual dignity within institutions that otherwise emphasized collective authority and traditional hierarchy. The regional variations we have encountered, from the Islamic marriage customs of Cordoba to the Celtic traditions of Ireland, reveal how local cultures adapted universal human needs to specific environmental and social conditions while maintaining recognizable patterns of courtship, ceremony, and family formation. These differences remind us that marriage is neither a natural institution that remains unchanged across history, nor a purely arbitrary social construction that can be redefined at will. As we reflect on the centuries of human experience we have witnessed, we begin to understand that medieval marriage customs, for all their apparent strangeness and obvious limitations, address the same fundamental challenges that continue to complicate relationships in our own time. The need to balance individual fulfillment with social responsibility, the challenge of maintaining long-term partnerships in changing circumstances, the difficulty of creating institutions that serve diverse needs fairly and effectively, all remain as relevant today as they were in the medieval world. The men and women whose stories we have shared faced choices that were both constrained by their historical circumstances and meaningful within their own cultural contexts. Their marriages may not have looked like contemporary relationships, but they served similar purposes and reflected similar hopes. Their struggles and successes, their compromises and achievements, their moments of joy and sorrow, all remind us that the human search for love, security, and meaning transcends the particular forms that different societies create to channel those universal aspirations. The workshop where Thomas and Alice learned to blend personal affection with professional partnership. The castle where Eleanor of Aquitaine transformed courtly love from literary convention into cultural revolution. The Highland stronghold where Moira and Alasdair chose each other through hand-fasting. The Venetian palace where Caterina balanced commercial advantage with romantic feeling, all represent different attempts to solve the same essential puzzle of how to create relationships that honor both individual dignity and collective welfare. Their legacy survives not just in the legal and social institutions they created, but in the human courage and creativity they demonstrated in finding ways to love and be loved within whatever constraints their societies imposed. Their example reminds us that every generation must discover its own solutions to eternal challenges, its own ways of balancing competing values and conflicting demands. In the end, the history of medieval dating and marriage teaches us that human relationships have always required both passion and pragmatism, both individual choice and social support, both romantic idealism and practical cooperation. The forms may change across centuries and cultures, but the fundamental human needs remain constant, along with the creative ingenuity that allows each generation to find new ways of honoring old aspirations. The cathedral bells that ring out across Paris as Marie and Henri complete their wedding ceremony echo with the voices of countless other couples who have spoken similar vows in different words, who have faced similar challenges in different circumstances, who have sought similar happiness through different customs and traditions. Their story continues in every marriage that attempts to balance love with duty, individual fulfillment with social responsibility, personal dreams with practical necessities. The medieval world that produced such sophisticated expressions of human culture and social organization may be gone forever, but the human needs it served and the human values it embodied continue to shape our own search for meaning and connection. In understanding their stories, we better understand our own, and in honoring their struggles, we honor the continuing human quest for relationships that serve both heart and mind, both temporal happiness and eternal significance. The young peasant woman saving coins for her marriage fine, the merchant's daughter calculating the value of potential alliances, the noble lady accepting political duty while dreaming of romantic love, the Highland warrior choosing partnership through ancient ritual, the scholar's wife finding intellectual companionship in marriage, all speak to us across the centuries, with voices that remain startlingly contemporary in their hopes and fears, their dreams and disappointments. Their world may seem distant and alien, but their humanity remains immediately recognizable and deeply moving. They remind us that love has always found ways to flourish within whatever constraints history provides, that the human heart has proven remarkably adaptable to circumstances while maintaining its essential needs for connection, understanding, and hope. As the winter sun sets behind the towers of Notre Dame and the wedding guests disperse to their various destinations across Europe, carrying news of the ceremony and memories of the celebration back to their own communities and families, we can sense both the ending of one chapter in human history and the beginning of another. The medieval world is transforming around them, creating new possibilities and new challenges that will require fresh solutions to ancient problems. But the fundamental human story continues, written in different words but expressing the same eternal themes of love and loss, hope and disappointment, individual aspiration, and collective responsibility. The couples who will marry in the centuries to come will face their own unique circumstances and specific challenges, but they will also participate in the same ongoing human quest for relationships that serve both personal fulfillment and social purpose. The bells that celebrate Marie and Henri's wedding also toll for the medieval world that made their marriage possible, marking both achievement and transition, both completion and beginning. Their story becomes part of the larger narrative of how human beings in every era have sought to create institutions that honor individual dignity while serving collective needs, that balance personal happiness with social stability, that preserve valuable traditions while adapting to changing circumstances. In their success and their struggles, in their moments of joy and their times of trial, in their ability to find love within constraint and meaning within limitation, they embody the eternal human capacity to create beauty and significance from whatever materials history provides. Their legacy lives on in every couple that seeks to build a life together, every family that attempts to balance competing demands and conflicting values, every community that tries to support individual flourishing while maintaining social cohesion. The medieval world of dating and marriage may be gone, but its essential insights about human nature and social organization continue to inform our understanding of what it means to love and be loved, to commit and be committed to find individual fulfillment within relationships that serve purposes larger than ourselves. In their stories, we find not just historical curiosity, but continuing wisdom about the eternal challenge of creating relationships that honor both the freedom of the individual heart and the responsibilities of life in community. And so our journey through the medieval world of love and marriage concludes where it began, with recognition that the human search for connection and meaning transcends any particular historical moment while finding unique expression in every time and place. The forms change, but the fundamental needs endure, along with the remarkable human capacity to find new ways of honoring old aspirations, new solutions to ancient challenges, new expressions of eternal hopes. The couples whose stories we have shared remind us that marriage has always been both deeply personal and thoroughly social, both intensely private and inescapably public, both shaped by individual choice and constrained by collective necessity. Understanding their experiences helps us better understand our own, revealing both how much and how little has changed in the human quest for love, security, and meaning through the bonds that unite us across generations and cultures. Their legacy endures not in the specific customs they practiced or the particular institutions they created, but in their demonstration that human love and commitment can flourish under any circumstances, that the heart's deepest needs can be served within any social framework, that every generation possesses the creativity and courage necessary to find its own path toward relationships that honor both individual dignity and collective welfare. In the flickering candlelight of medieval chambers and the golden sunlight of medieval courtyards, in the sacred spaces of churches and the practical spaces of workshops and fields, human beings found ways to love and be loved, to create families and build communities, to find meaning and purpose through relationships that connected them to something larger than themselves. Their courage and creativity, their struggles and achievements, their ability to find joy within constraint and hope within limitation, continue to inspire and instruct us as we face our own challenges and seek our own solutions to the eternal puzzle of how to live together in ways that serve both individual fulfillment and collective flourishing. The story they began continues in every marriage, every family, every community that seeks to balance these eternal tensions in ways that honor human dignity and serve human welfare. Their voices echo in every wedding ceremony, every family celebration, every moment when two people choose to bind their lives together in hope and faith and love. The medieval world may be gone, but the human story it embodied continues, written in new words but expressing the same timeless themes of connection and commitment, sacrifice and joy, individual aspiration and shared responsibility that define the human condition in every age.